I can barely afford one product manager. Now you're asking me to hire like 4 of them. How do I go about it, right? What would the answer be?
Okay, great. Before I answer the question, I just want to give credit to where I took this that's a screenshot from, and it's Reforge, which is you can go on the Reforge website. They offer courses about product management, and they have an excellent blog, and this is where this categorization comes from. So to go back to your question, I think this categorization isn't so much from the product, from the perspective of the company, but more from the perspective of the individual. So as an individual, I have to think, what type of product manager do I want to be? Where do I want my career to go? If I make the parallel with you as a developer, for example, do you want to be a front-end developer? Do you want to be a back-end developer? So it's that kind of specialization. But again, maybe you don't have to choose, and especially in a startup, you may have to do it all. So maybe you've worked a lot on the front end, for example, but in the startup, you have to do it all.
Oh,
So
wait a minute. So,
yeah,
Magali, sorry to interrupt you. So, let me make sure I understood this correctly. So, what you're saying is the recommendation was not so much that you need all 4 or a combination of those. You're just saying, hey, when you're playing that role as a product manager, out of these 4 categories, what might be the most appropriate one, that the hat that you might need to wear for the current work that you're doing? Is that the point?
exactly. Yeah. So it can be a hat that you wear for a particular role, or it can be a hat that you wear for your entire career. Yes,
Absolutely. Okay.
exactly. But as a company, when you start, to give you an example of your company, well, you can only afford one PM. This PM most likely has got to do it all. They've got to maybe, I've worked in small companies before, and we don't have product marketing. So not only am I the product manager, but I'm also the product marketer. We don't have technical documentation to write the user manuals. So I'm also the technical writer. We don't have customer support. So I'm also customer support. And I'm also helping with pre-sales and solutions engineering and all of that, right? So obviously when you're a startup, you don't have many resources. And as you said, you've got to do it all. So you only start with one PM, which most of the time is the traditional PM role, which is that core PM. Core PM is what we think of like the kind of traditional PM role. But then as you grow, it depends on your business model. But let's say you want to do product-led growth business model, where you want to really encourage virality of your product. You want to have light touch sales. And I think that's somehow what you're doing, attracting users and then getting them to test out the product
Right.
first, and then they love it, and then they're going to convert into paying users, right? In that case, if you think that is too much for one person, then you may want to hire a growth product manager, because they're going to be specializing in bringing that growth. And at some point, you're going to become a scale up, and you're going to start running into some issues with scaling, right? And you're going to need somebody to be providing almost like platform as a service, so that every other funny, there's some hearts on the screen when I do
Yeah.
this gesture.
Oh, but did that pick it? Did the tool pick it up basically?
Yeah, I don't know.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to take this
Technology.
opportunity to move on.
um, yes, so you're going to have someone like to deal with the platform and the scalability. And at some point, you're going to be, I hope for your company, you're going to be this big machine where you've got lots of PMs, lots of dependencies, and you realize, I don't have time for innovation, or I really want to enter this new market, but with the structure that we've got, we can't do it. So we need another PM, especially working on innovation, to start like launching new products or launching new segments from 0 to 1. And that's when you hire an innovation PM. So actually, I find that the order from core, growth, platform, and innovation fits quite well with the life cycle of a company and of a product. But yeah, when you start, you only have one PM, and they do it all like everybody else.
I have a couple of questions there. I'm going to turn I thought I sat in the right place. I didn't realize that the sun is going to like beat down on, no matter
No
how much you
worries.
prepare something that, it's just the nature of life, I think. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm just to turn this whole thing around over
No
here.
worries. At least it's sunny. I'm looking outside and it's dark in London,
Oh,
and
it's
I
England.
can't even tell you if it was sunny today because I spent the day working, even if it was from home. I don't think I even looked
Outside.
outside the window.
Sorry. My apologies to folks for this.
No problem.
I have a mic here. It's sitting on a glass table and it slides all. And sorry, you can still hear me, right, Megali?
Yes. Oh, good.
Okay, this is why I'm not yet a professional podcaster, but hopefully the material is what I'm hoping people are going to watch this for, because this is outstanding what you just mentioned. And as I was trying to wait that son away, I had questions. So just to recap, right? The core PM, the growth PM, the platform PM, and the innovation PM. What Megali you're saying is it's not so much you're saying you need all four. If you can, great, right, at some point. But the role, the type of product manager you're going to be, perhaps in every phase of that project or the cycle of the product, for instance, right, you're going to have to wear these different hats, and maybe a combination of these hats. And maybe you may have answered my questions, but I'm going to read out these questions just so I know. Do larger orgs have more than one PM for doing the same type of work? I think you answered the question. If so, how do they clearly separate these roles, as there's bound to be some overlap, but you also answered them. And are there combinations of these PMs that are common? I think you answered all of them. So I think I can go to the next point here, which is on page number 20. You talked about retraining product managers, right? My question there is, product managers' daily life. What did I say there? Daily life at work in Yep. So retraining product managers. My question here, my question here is even pre the advent of AI, right? Because that changes the whole conversation. So everywhere I'm having conversations, I'm having to make that separation, because when you say something is changing, everyone's naturally going to think it's all because of AI. Surely a lot of it is because of that. But even outside of that, things still continue to change. It's not like things never change in the last many years, right? So this question is not so much from necessarily from an AI perspective, but in your mind, let's say a PM's, a product manager's daily life, let's say a year ago, 2 years ago, right? How that was compared to how that is, say, today or maybe a year after. Uh, Maybe AI, you can take that as an example if that makes sense, but it doesn't have to be. Retraining product managers. What is the core problem we are addressing here? How do we go about addressing that problem? And that's on page 20.
Yeah. So I have to say, at this point, I make it specific to product manager because this is my domain. But I have to say, pretty much any professional on the planet is affected by the fact that the skills they've got now may be completely irrelevant in 10 years' time. And if you look at the stat that is in the book,
You said maybe, Megali, you said maybe. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, because I didn't find any stats just about product management because nobody does this kind of study. But the World Economic Forum says that over half of employees globally will have to retrain or to learn new skills by 2025. So it's like in 2 years' time. So we're not even talking 10 years. Like we don't know what it's going to be in 10 years. And it's affecting everyone, really. So where am I going with that? The skill, like, how did that change? How did product
sorry, where
management?
you're going with that was I was asking you, how do we go about retraining? Like, even if you took product managers, right? Like if you take a simple example and say this, because retraining, because a lot of companies don't have the budget to send people out on a week's trip, and classes, they're very expensive, right? So if you could, I'm just looking to see, how do we retrain that doesn't cost a lot of money, right? How would we go about it?
I don't know if there's a solution, an answer to that, but it doesn't cost a lot of money. What I can tell you is that in the past, companies relied on academia, and we're expecting that people who leave university have the right skills, and this is also driven by the government, right? I think it's very difficult to imagine that the government and academia are going to go as fast as technology. As we know, if you look at the regulatory landscape, we're already struggling to regulate the internet and social media, right? So we shouldn't rely on those. And also because it's people who are employed right now, so they have left academia, who will need to learn new skills. So it needs to happen when people are at work. So the best people to train trained workers are actually the companies themselves, and also the companies, because they know the skills they need, so they can
Right.
really target the training. So the companies are going to have to bear that cost, I believe. um, is
But
it a
you see that
cost or is it an investment? I think
it's an
it's an
invest, right?
investment.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
right. But does it have to happen like, how do you if you were to recommending to a company to doing this, right? Is it because there's let me take two parallel, mutually exclusive examples. Krish is being trained. Let me take a developer's life, right? You're being trained on certain technologies, but it only happens when the company makes the decision to make a switch to some other technology, right? We did A and we're going to do B tomorrow. Now you send a bunch of people, have them get trained, and then week after, Krish is coming back as he's this quote unquote expert on B. That doesn't happen that way, right? So is there a different path to this? In other words, do you train organically, gradually, and seamlessly, even though it might sound like a leading question? There's pros and cons either way. Or is it not pragmatic to doing it that way? You're going to have to just like wait till the time where the training is required. And then you say, here is where we're going to retrain. And then we're going to do it all in a week's time or a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, you have to do it progressively. I heard last week that it's Slack like, stopped working for a week because they wanted their employees to finish some training. And there was some criticism. People were saying, you're going to force these people in 1 week to do all the mandatory training. What are they going
Right.
to remember by the end of it? Like just watching videos all day for 5 days, right? Then I had some some people actually who used to work at Salesforce, Salesforce having acquired Slack, who told me, oh, it was actually kind of a company culture training. So you probably only need to watch it once to understand more about the culture and the company and the
Mm.
history and the different products. So I don't work there, so I can't judge, but also I would be wary of not judging too fast. So you're right that just watching videos or being told, okay, you have to do this training and then you are an expert by the end of a week, that's not how it happens. Actually, I had the discussion yesterday with some other people about AI, but it's about learning new skills anyway. And they were saying, well, it's about the tools that you bring within the company. I'm going to give you an example. But my company has implemented ChatGPT. So, lots of companies have banned the use of ChatGPT because they don't want their data to go in there, which is fair. But there is an enterprise version of ChatGPT which you can implement. Well, the fact that my company provides me with that means that I can use it and I can learn where it's good at, where it's not good at, how it can help me. And that's like this, by providing me with the tool and giving me a chance to experiment, but I'm learning progressively and then I'm going to generate ideas, right? So definitely it needs some practical implementation, giving some time for people to use those tools, training them actually. And I think there are learning and development executives who know a lot more about the theory of how people learn much better than me. It doesn't happen instantly. Yes, it's over the year, you have this 1 year development plan with your manager. Well, it should include some training. And it's not at the end in December that you realize, oh, I missed my training goals and I have to do them very quickly.
Absolutely,
No.
right?
Yeah.
And then what happens, at least in my experience, is when you're sent to this training, you still need to get your stuff done, kind of, right? So it's kind of piling up. So at the back of your mind, I've had real life experience where, I was sent on training, but I still need to get stuff done. And the next time when someone says go to training, I was like, no, it just increases your workload. It's not like you're going to training because you're still doing what you need to get done and still you have to go to training, right? So there is that balance. But I want to call out, when I go through these sessions and talking to really interesting people and learning in the process, I also, my intent is not just learning the content, the material, but also learning other aspects of people in general, right? Like for instance, I want to call out for people watching this. A few minutes ago, when I mentioned the PM, I believe it was the product manager types, right? The core, growth, and platform. You chimed in very quickly to say that you quoted a source, for instance, right? Crediting them to doing it. I want to talk about that for a second because, I think it's very important. When people call me and say, Krish, what is your biggest skill, right? And I'm not making this up. I promise I tell this to everybody. It's not development. It's not architecture. It's not product management. It's not running a company. I mean, I do all of that, but that's not what I truly say as the first skill I have. I say it's my credibility, right? The trait. It's not a skill, it's a trait. It's hard enough to find good people, like to do what you need done from a help standpoint. But I think it becomes even harder, in my experience, at least, Megli, to find people who are not just good but are very credible. So I think a shout out, just the fact that you actually chimed in to say that you're quoting somebody. I want people to be inspired by something like that, and I think it's more than reading something, more than actually you live by example, right? And you see people, you learn how they do things, and it gives you the credit. So when I'm writing code, when I go to Stack Overflow, for instance, sometimes to find an example, I'm very careful. I make sure I go to that particular comment, copy that source, and stick it. Even though I'm not using that example as is, I also feel like even if somebody gave me pointers, it took me in the direction of where I wanted to go. So I'm not literally taking something from some place, right? It doesn't happen that way. But you're influenced by those examples and decisions, and you feel like you want to give due credit where it's due. So, it's completely unrelated in some ways to the conversation, but I still wanted to, call out for that, right? Okay, so we were on retraining PMs. Now, the next item I have here on page 22, right? You talked about products for a new generation of users. This is a really broad topic, but I want to, it still caught my attention there, right? So my question there, because you go into more details, so I think when folks are reading the book, they can go to page 22 and get more details about it. But my question, demographic of product managers impacting the future of product, right? That's what that literally speaks to. Correct me if I'm wrong, that page speaks to, right? You mentioned product managers from like a decade ago. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what's there from what I can remember from my read. Uh, your demographic is going to play a role in anything that you do, right? It's not specific to product management, but I keep saying product management, not just because you're an author of a book that's on product management and we're having a conversation about product management. It's not just that. It's also because some of these are specific to, if I could call it, subjective aspects, right? I say subjective because it's not zeros and ones, right? It's more subjective in that sense. I say when it comes to development in engineering and binaries, you can try to quantify things, right? You can do a reasonably good job in quantifying. And if you're a developer like I am, you find ways in quantifying everything that's not even quantifiable, because that's the only way you actually understand how things should be. But not everything in life is quantifiable. Certainly not by a distance, right? So what are the, I mean, outside of, what you've already said in the book, I just wanted your thoughts in your words and voice as to what that meant. Products for a new generation of users, and what is the demographic impact of who is working on a certain item.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with a question for you, like, and if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure.
How old is your son?
Oh, he just graduated from college, right? He's like,
Okay.
he's 23. Yeah.
Okay, well, 23. And then can you tell then that your son thinks differently and perceives things differently, apart from the fact that, maybe you, like, when you were 23, you were thinking differently yourself, right? But can you tell that there's a
No,
difference in
absolutely,
how
right?
the generation? Yeah.
Two answers to that. Just because he happens to be my son, he ends up thinking very differently, because everything I think is right doesn't come across as right to him. But that's just him being a kid, right? A child or whatever, or a grown, a young adult, I should say. But outside of that, I know what you mean. So there's two things. You mentioned two things there that are very different but are of equal interest to me. You said, okay, there's a different generation. They're going to approach the same problem very differently. If you ask me to design a page, how I might do it, given my demographic, could possibly be different from his demographic, right? So that's one thing. The second thing that you mentioned, I want to say both, then we'll talk both of them, right? When I was that age, right? We all go through those ages in life, right? Would I have thought similarly to what he may be thinking today? Because both of us are, assuming the same age. Not really, because the technology, the world, the cultures, the problems, the challenges, the strengths, the weaknesses, yada, yada, yada. All of them were quite different when I was that age, for instance, right? So there are two completely different facets, right? So just to go back, because I want to talk about each of them. I don't know which one. You can pick and choose which one you want to talk about first, but I want to say that there are two different problems, and I just want to say, what do we want to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the one I mostly want to talk about is the second one, which is the really the impact of the generation, the way, like if we talk about, so Gen Z, I think you're Gen Z, and then so I'm a zillennial, I like to call it, because millennial on at the end of the spectrum towards Gen Z. They think differently. Like for example, and Generation Alpha, which is the next one. I have people in the Generation Alpha, and they're gonna come like very soon and work with us. Right, 50% of the working force in the USA is now Gen Z. Right, so this has two impacts. One, you work with people who think differently, even if they grew up in the same place, they're same characteristic. I don't know, like a
No,
white
absolutely.
man,
Yeah.
the same, they will think differently. So adapting to that. So you work with people who have a different perspective on life. And also your users have a different perspective. Let's say if I were the product manager for TikTok, my users, I don't use TikTok myself, like my users are the next generation. So I really need to emphasize a lot more with a generation that is completely foreign to me. And this is important for everyone, but you, for example, you see it because you got your son, so you see the differences, but you're not living your son's life, so you just scratch the surface, you see
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But I am child free, so I have absolutely like no touch with the new generation, right? So we
Right.
have to make, as product managers, when we design products for this new generation, which is now every product manager, because even B2B products, millennials and Gen Z are working right now. They are entering the workforce. They are using those B2B products. We have to really make a conscious effort to understand that generation. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I want to continue with that. And I want to tell people uh, my personality as a person, as an engineer, do I read books to do what I do? Do I go to training? None of that stuff, right? Give me a new task and a new language, new technology, Megali, and I'm not making this up. I just start writing code without doing any reading at all because it's just my nature. But with that said, when I went through the book yesterday, uh, I want to definitely call out for it, right? It there To me, I felt like every page I flipped and turned, there were a couple of points that stood out for me, right? And it was very succinct, right? You're probably way more succinct than I am. I write a book, it's going to be like 1,000 pages before I get to something. But I want people who are reading it to pause for a moment and try to find a connection to what their problems. That's exactly what I did yesterday in my preparation to the podcast, right? I just want to make sure I was prepared, which I don't do, but I'm trying to be a bit more prepared when I'm actually, podcasting with people. But when went through the book, I was like, no, I have a lot more questions about this bullet. I have a lot more questions about that bullet, right? So I think it is written by somebody, which is you, obviously. But what I mean by somebody in a third person is who understands the core problem per se, right? It's not just writing it because you're. Sometimes you can read something, you're reading 25 pages, and you're like, okay, did I learn anything new in this process? Did it get me thinking? That's not the takeaway I had at all, right? So it was awesome. So I highly recommend people check that out and have their own perspectives to these very same items. And also culturally, perhaps because you're located in another part of the world, I think it's more frank, I think. And I personally, I'm very it connected with me better, right? It was not like trying to say use euphemisms to getting to a point. Sometimes the truth is the truth is the truth, right? I mean, you can try to change it a little bit here and there, but it doesn't. Like, in other words, what you're telling me, Megli, is like I could not relocate today to a part of France and go to somewhere where there's 25-year-olds and only 25-year-olds living there, work in their company and be a product manager. You're saying I'm going to have to make some adjustment, and that's completely understandable.
Exactly, it's all about learning, and that's where I think curiosity and the ability to learn is going to be one of the top skills that people
Oh my
need to
God,
be
I
able
couldn't
to
agree with
switch.
you
Yeah.
more. Absolutely, because
Mm.
I think every day I live and I know a bit more than the day before because I'm just growing older and doing more of those things, right? I've actually realized I actually know less than what I thought I knew the day before, right? When I was 23, I thought I knew a lot about engineering. When I was 25, I realized I didn't know as much as I thought I knew about engineering at 23, right? Fast forward like 2 decades, now I know how little I know about engineering and there's how much more to go, right? So I think knowing more actually makes you realize that you actually do know lesser. And that acknowledgement is, in my mind, absolutely critical. If you have this true curiosity, like you mentioned, right? The key word there is curiosity, right? Now, are there easier ways to live life in any situation? 100%, right?
Yeah.
100%. I mean, I can give you a very direct example, right? Running a startup, I'm not saying one is harder than the other. I'm just speaking from my own experience. It's nothing. I mean, it's not going to be a revelation to say it's not easy. Everybody understands that, right? Everything in life is difficult. It's not easy. But what do you think are going to be the challenges are going to be not necessarily the challenges, right? Challenges that you're bound to encounter are going to be very different from challenges that you had anticipated, right? In my example, I thought engineering would be a challenge. I'm a developer, but building software is not easy. I'm going to be hitting roadblocks and staring at the walls or the ceilings or whatever all the time, hitting a wall, right? Does it not happen? Does it happen? Sure, it does happen, but that's not our biggest challenge. Everything else I thought was not even a challenge, or because I didn't even know there was such a thing, becomes a challenge, right? So tying it back to product management, right? All of the items, even that we've discussed so far, just to do a midway recap. I say midway, but I don't even think we're anywhere near midway in this conversation here, but I still want to call it midway and just do a quick recap on items, right? And if somebody's like forwarding to the end of the podcast or whatever, I want them to know the page numbers. We talked about page 10, unique selling propositions, them becoming standard offerings, and Magali had called out for photographs and digital and smartphones as an example. We talked about, I'm only going to call it for the book references here, right? Page 15, demand for PMs and their salaries across geographical regions. We talked a little bit about that. Page 16, we talked about product management types, core, growth, platform, and innovation, and how you may transition from one to the other within the scope of a single problem or a project that you're in. Page 20, we are talking about retraining product managers. Page 22, we've talked about products for a new generation of users, right? That's basically where we are at. There's more pages, obviously. There's more items that we need to go into. But I want to pause here for a moment. Was that a fair recap? And if it's not, is there something you want to add or correct based on what I just recapped there, Magali?
No, I love a recap. I should do that in my podcast.
So, okay, cool. This is awesome, right? So let me ask you this. I know we are at probably, I think, maybe an hour, a little bit more than an hour in here, right? I have a lot more. I can keep going. Do you want to keep going, or do you want to pause and then sort of regroup? It's completely left to you.
No, let's keep going.
Okay,
It's
perfect.
fun. I'm really
But I
enjoying it.
know that we will not get to everything here. So my hope is not just in this example, Meghli, and I can say this as part of the recording. It's nothing secretive about it. Is to do an okay enough job as somebody who's not a podcaster. That there's some value add of people who show up at the podcast here, right? You're like, you know what? There are a few things. If you learn one thing that you did not already know at the end of this podcast, then I would feel like I did my job, right? I learned plenty during in these conversations, but my hope is I give back something. Unfortunately, we're not talking coding here, so it's not something very naturally for me to give back. But please, during the conversation, if you wanted me to connect some of these dots to actual lines of code, not a problem, right? We have a stack that's pretty wide. It covers the gamut in terms of technologies. And, as a partner in the company, I own the IP as well. So I have no issues in literally doing a screen share and jumping into it anytime, anything that, the only thing is I haven't started drawing anything. I have no creative talents really, but I love drawing. I represent everything I do in pictures and diagrams using tools. I wish I'd captured this. For some reason, I was so engrossed in the conversation that I didn't pause for a moment, to switch back to drawing here. But I think as we go, we can do that. Okay, so going to the next item, right? For people, if you want to take a break, just pause this recording at this point. Just grab a cup of coffee or tea, depending on the part of the world you're in, and then you can, continue the conversation. Yep. And I might even end up posting this as like 2 different podcasts. I don't know, because sometimes there's a size limit on some of these platforms and whatnot. Yep. Okay, cool. So the next item.